Information. Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Hellman.
Now guess what? Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool.
Back in the dark ages, 2008, when the amount of irrelevant, contextless gush spouting at us from our various screens day and night was already reaching psychically damaging proportions, the internet guru Clay Shirky told us that though we might think so, we weren't suffering from information overload. What we had, he said, was filter failure. We hadn't yet developed the filters we needed to manage all this guff. So, 12 years later, are we any better off? No, we're not. This situation is particularly problematical for learners. What with so much misinformation, fake news, false flags, cybercriminals, conspiracy theory nutjobs, and with some of the richest, most powerful companies on the planet working 24/7 to distract them on behalf of advertisers, how are they supposed to learn anything at all? Luckily, our guest this time on The Learning Hack has just the filters that we need to save us from filter failure. Kate, tell us about him.
Hack facts.
Toby Harris is Director of Product Marketing at innovative Learntech company Filtered. A graduate of St John's College, Oxford, with a PhD from Birkbeck in European avant-garde and Irish cultural production, Toby is clearly a Renaissance man, and has a Renaissance beard to prove it. His first job in learning was with saffron, my favourite colour, and he has also worked for Mind Leaders and been Vice Chair of the e-Learning Network.
It's a great beard. Toby is rated an inspiring and engaging speaker by Ed Monk of the Learning and Performance Institute, no less. So Jay, what did he speak to me about? Give us the themes.
Sometimes, John, you have a guest on the podcast who picks up very nicely on the themes raised in the previous episode. It's almost like you plan it that way.
Well, I do.
I'm sure. So in the last episode, Greg Collins attacked some aspects of both AI and curation. And in this one, it's like Toby goes into bat for them. After all, that's what his company Filtered does, AI-driven curation. So interesting, this clash of perspectives.
Thanks, Jay. But can Filtered really save learners from filter failure? Do we trust Toby's algorithms to protect us from all the other algorithms working away inside our brains? Facebooks, Twitters, Googles? You decide. So, welcome to The Learning Hack, Toby Harris. Everybody knows that people who study literature at university and who work in marketing are absolutely the brightest and the best. Of course, I only say that because I studied literature at university and work in marketing. But it gives me a lead in to ask you how you got into learning technologies and how and why you became Director of Product Marketing at Filtered rather than, say, writing books about Flann O'Brien, which you also do.
Thanks. It's nice to be here. So I am, in fact, engaged in producing books about Flann O'Brien, if that's what you want to describe it. I've got various publication projects underway, and I recently completed my PhD thesis and was awarded it and all that. So the book is somewhere down the line, but I have been running this as a sideline alongside my day job, and so academia has a very elongated timelines at the best of times, but especially when you don't have your full time to devote to it. So it'll be some years yet before you see a full book appear, but maybe we can share some links to where people can read the stuff that is out there and available.
Yeah, sure.
So I found it really quite a positive thing, actually, to have these two tracks. You know, like the reason that I've ended up in learning technologies and now in product marketing for Filtered is ultimately a result of failure, I suppose, because I'd failed to win the right sort of funding or get the right sort of results at various points to kind of go on to like a full-time academic track. And although for a few years I did regard that as a failure, I now see it as a strength because the the kind of interdisciplinary benefits or network effects you get from running those two careers at the same time are quite big. There's a lot of direct overlap, of course. Academic work is all about digital learning technologies, podcasting, all of this sort of stuff we're doing right now. And I've ended up finding the work and the specialization that I've developed in learning technologies to be really fulfilling and to be so directly informed by the academic work. You've had plenty of people on your podcast telling you about how important it is to know about the latest in scientific research into any particular domain, especially into learning theory and learning research. And that's sort of one benefit. You know, I've got the necessary library logins and access and the ability to kind of read and consume this stuff. And so bringing a more wide-ranging understanding of literature, philosophy, organizational design, whatever you want to, you know, pick upon into my day-to-day work in product marketing at Filtered has been really useful.
So you're one of those enviable people who doesn't keep bouncing up against paywalls whenever they try to look at an academic paper. And sorry, by the way, for not calling you Dr. Harris, at least to begin with. But you were at Saffron, was it?
That's right, yeah.
The first company. How did you actually get into that? Because it's always interesting the way that, you know, people's paths come into learning technologies, because, you know, very few people, except very young people now, thought at university, I'm going to be in learning technologies when I grow up.
Yeah, I love it when I get asked this, because the answer is quite a good one. I was working my first job, graduating into the credit crunch period, was into the great financial crisis, whatever you want to call it, was just a kind of business development lead generation job. So just ringing people up and booking meetings, lots of valuable training.
I've done that too.
Yeah. I value it actually quite a lot. I think there's a real art to doing it, and I enjoy doing a bit of it when I need to as well myself, even to this day. But I was approached by a recruitment consultant who said, I've got a job you might find interesting. It's a company, and what they do is they take boring stuff and they make it funny, and they need a copywriter to help them with doing that. And that was how the job of the venerable role of instructional designer at Saffron Interactive was pitched to me in 2009.
Yeah, the opposite of the truth. I mean, what an instructional designer does is take interesting stuff and make it boring.
Absolutely, yes.
According, not to me, but to Greg Collins, our last interview. Filtered has on the face of it a very easily understandable proposition. We all suffer from information overload, or as Clay Shirky would have it, from filter failure. It's quoted on your website. So your technology is there to bring the filter, to sort the wheat from the chaff in information overload for employees of organisations. And if I've got it right, you do that both for the organisation's internal content and for their external content curated from the web. So can you tell us a bit about how that works and why it is that you can do a better job than Google?
Absolutely. So I just listened to the Greg Collins episode, and I had to listen to it with some concern, because he does spend about 10 minutes talking about how anyone claiming to use artificial intelligence to do curation is talking a load of nonsense and needs to qualify those claims. So let me try to frame this in a way that wouldn't invoke that kind of criticism. I think that's important. Mm-hmm. What we are not is a company that just applies AI, machine learning, willy-nilly to the problem and expects it to work. We're well aware that the proven fields for artificial intelligence are areas like image recognition and areas like translation. And the more dubious, unproven areas are in fact areas like recommendation. So if AI can't be trusted really to make powerful recommendations on its own, for all the reasons that Greg mentioned, what is doing it? How are we filtering from the wheat from the chaff? Well, the answer, and this is where I disagree with Greg, is it's in curation, actually. If Filtered is any kind of business, I would say we are a curation business. And there's a great book, a very inspiring book by Michael Baskar on just entitled Curation, about the rise of this as a business model across so many domains, everything from coffee shops to the music industry. So many businesses are really curation businesses. And what does curation mean? It means that you're good at understanding quite a broad domain, selecting the right knowledge and the right pieces of content for a particular purpose, and then doing something around that, not just chucking it in front of people, which is the kind of maybe bad curation that Greg was talking about, but leveraging the original meaning of it, the Latin, curator, or to care for something. Mm-hmm. You need to take care of what you're selecting. You need to present it in the right way. You need to add context to make it make sense. So curation is always going to be a part of what we do, but we also have a volume problem to contend with in corporate learning. Not only do corporate learning teams have a huge volume of priorities that they have to triage, that's an important art in itself, they have a huge volume of content to contend with. There's a quote that I come back to again and again from Benedict Evans, this kind of Andreessen Horowitz VC thinker type guy, who famously said, all curation grows until it needs search, but all search grows until it needs curation. So there's a constant life cycle in L&D. You've got a task. You start off by selecting all the best resources to help you to achieve that, and you put them into a platform. And at that point, your platform can be a very simple platform. It can look very good and it can work very well. Take that up to 100, you're just about there. Take it up to 200, suddenly your simple platform has to be a bit more complex to work. Our customers don't have 200 pieces of content. They might have 200,000 pieces of content that they need to understand. And that's where you need some technology. And what Filtered does is bring the right blend of technology and people to bear. And so the other concept that I want to introduce and come back to, it's a quite cool, hypey concept, is the idea of centaur technology. This is a way of describing teams that are the best kind of hybrid of machine learning and human intelligence.
So this is centaur, Centaur, as in the mythical beast. Yes,
exactly.
Half horse, half person.
Yeah, centaur in the Greek mythological sense, yeah.
Right.
My experience of Filtered has been fantastic because it's taught me all about how AI works and how it doesn't work and all the myths around AI. The idea that it's anything more than another tool in the toolbox, and that's all it really is. But it is a powerful tool if you can combine it with people who understand the nuance of the problem they're working on and are willing to spend time on it. So the work we do with skills, with content intelligence, with recommendations, with pathways, it's all about having a team that is able to understand the nuance of the problem, understand that every skill is different, that all learning outcomes are different, that organizations are different, at the same time as being able to bring to bear the best technology, which enables you to analyze all of that content at a stroke according to certain criteria, try and get the outcome you want, switch the criteria, and so on. It's this kind of experimental approach that we take. And I think that's why clients like us, it's easy, as we have on our website, to frame the problem, the right stuff to the right person. It's incredibly difficult to solve that problem.
So without getting too detailed, the content sorting, the filtering, it's going to happen along two dimensions of kind of relevance and provenance, isn't it? Authority, your quality rather. You want to know whether it's relevant to what people are looking for, and you also want to know that it is good stuff. So how do you do those two things?
Absolutely. Yeah, relevance and quality are the two main factors that we bring to bear. Quality can be inferred relatively easily from corporate libraries at the level of provider. And it's context dependent, for some people, one content provider isn't good quality, for another it is, depending on the type of end users they have. But quality can also be assessed in a number of other ways. You might want to look at the accessibility of the content. You might want to look at the recency of its updates if it's research-led content. Most of these things can be inferred. And quality is very good because something that's incredible quality is likely to be in some way appealing and interesting and sparking curiosity and surprise for almost anyone in a certain demographic group, which organizations tend to be quite homogenous. So that is a powerful tool in your toolbox. Get the quality high, and it's what we've focused on in so many ways. The other part is relevance. And relevance we infer by taking the user's situation, so what role they have in a company, what their immediate goals might be, what challenges they have at the moment, maybe self-assessments of their own skills and so on, and turning that into what we call a skill signature. And we bring the fact that we've tagged all of this content against all of these skills and the fact that we can make an inference about the likely important skills for the person, and we create a match overlaying one skill signature on the other one. Okay. The secret to how we do it, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but the secret to how we do it relatively well is not actually incredibly advanced technology. It's really just a more practical, pragmatic realization that you can't do this in a general purpose way. Take something like leadership. It doesn't exist as a general skill. Skills don't generalized skills don't exist, and even when they seem to, they just break down into like all these other smaller skills that can be so
I'd like to talk about that problem a bit later in a bit more detail, but I think first of all, why are you better at Google than Google at this? I'd like you to answer that question, because if you're not better than Google, you don't have a value proposition. I'm kind of getting the impression from what you're saying that it's not filtered. It's not a set and go thing that you buy filtered and then it's goodbye and that's it. That you very much work with companies on their specific requirements and in an ongoing way. Is that?
Yes, exactly. We're not competing with Google to serve up the right content in response to a particular query. It turns out that there is nuance to that. If you know a function in Excel and you can't remember how to use it, yes, Google will serve up the answer. On the other hand, if you type in something like what is unconscious bias or what is leadership into Google, you will be assailed by commercially driven content that isn't right. So in some cases, our technology simply is better than Google, because we've got something specific in mind, which is content of an instructional quality. We're not about clicks, and we can do better than Google's knowledge graph. But that misses the real point. Google's always going to be there in the toolbox. What we actually do is help L&D teams deliver what they need to deliver, which is, learning programs that affect change. And it's really hard just to do that on its own. As we know, there's an ROI problem in the industry, but many corporate teams don't even get to the level of grappling with the hard problem of planning and measuring deliberate behavior change, intentional change in the organization, because they're just assailed with the basic issues of trying to serve what are almost infinitely sophisticated requirements with such limited means. So there's not just a curation example. All L&D teams now have to adopt modern digital communication strategies, email newsletters, using social media internally, community management. All of these things are hard. And so working with Filtered isn't just about turning on a piece of technology and then all of your problems are solved. We all know technology doesn't do anything unless it changes behavior. So the idea that would ever work is just a bit of a non-starter. What it really is about partnering with a company that has technology that it can bring to bear to do stuff that would take you 6 months to a year of planning in just a few weeks. And if you compound those advantages, our customers are able to solve a lot of those annoying issues, like not being able to understand the content they have or not being able to mount modern communications campaigns, to get that stuff sorted, and they can get back to the really high value activities that only they can do.
You are data.
You are data. You are data. You are data.
Every pulse of your heart, every step you take, the place you travel to, the thing that gets your attention, it all leaves a trace in data. And the world reconfigures itself around you, moment to moment, based on that data.
You are data. You are data.
Data has learned a lot about you over the years. Isn't it time you learned more about data?
You are data. You are data. You are data. You are data.
Data is a hot topic in learning right now, perhaps the hottest. But when you look at what's happened historically with learning analytics, it's hard to deny that it's been a little bit stuck. Stuck in the first two levels of Kirkpatrick. Stuck in what David Wilson and Charles Jennings have called the conspiracy of convenience. Stuck in a lack of capability, money, and time to evaluate. So how can we get ourselves out of this endless Mobius loop of wanting to do it all, but ending up not actually doing very much? I've talked to a lot of experts and practitioners, and the result is a whole series of guides and resources that Learning Pool will be releasing to help you map your way out of that loop. Download the first of these now. The Data and Learning White Paper.
You are data. You are data. You are data.
I'm really pleased that this episode is supported by NIIT, the global learning outsourcing company that helps organisations run training like a business. NIIT is dedicated to helping customers increase the business value of L&D. So whether it's reduced costs, increased flexibility and business alignment, technology innovation, or a dramatic improvement in learner experience you're after, you can trust NIIT to deliver measurable and transformative business impact. To learn more, visit niit.com. On Fosway's 9-grid, filtered is a potential challenger and a specialist learning system as opposed to a suite. Fosway divides things that way, if people don't know, into suites and specialists. So what are you a specialist in, and how do you see yourself fitting into the learning ecosystem, assuming you accept Fosway's categorization? The reason I ask that question is I think a suite kind of says that it creates its own ecosystem, but if you are a specialist, then you have to kind of fit in with the landscape around you. So really, how does filtered fit in with the learning ecosystem in learning systems?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think that the problem with all of these discussions and all of this language, and I myself am guilty of this in articles I would write, is that you're trying to posit a future state. You're trying to posit what the most mature organizations might be doing partially now. It's like the mythical level 4 of the Burton Associates maturity model of this kind of, performance focused integrated organization. And they said at the time, this is a few years ago now, but no one's really there. There's only pockets of excellence. And I think this is where the problem comes, because all of these terms that are being used assume that any of this is working even halfway in the way that it's supposed to. But of course it's not. The learning ecosystems are very fragmented. So as soon as you say, well, we fit into a learning ecosystem, you were immediately confronted with the question of, well, does the rest of the learning ecosystem actually work together? Which of course it doesn't in many cases. And I think that the suite versus specialist certainly has some value. And I what I like about it is you're putting providers on the spot and you're saying, look, what are you really good at? Don't just tell me you're good at everything. Tell me what your specific area is that you want to focus on. And I think that they have a specialism we slot into, which I believe is intelligence. So it's that maybe slightly nebulous, or at least expansive, idea of how smart, how intelligent are your systems, and what it implies is that for parts of the ecosystem where we will do the heavy lifting are to do with what goes in, filtering what the content sources and making sure they're lined up, but also helping you. I wouldn't necessarily say bring it together and unite it. I think that's more where your learning record store, data warehouse vendors might fit in. But certainly our curation approach enables us to curate the right questions to understand whether your learning ecosystem is working, and that level of analysis. There's certainly plenty of other people who would be doing different jobs within that. So something, for example, that we don't expressly focus on is building custom adaptive learning experiences. So stuff like companies like Area 9 do. That's not so much what we do. We operate at a slightly higher level than the individual course or the individual item of learning content.
We have a lot of problems with the fact that someone, I'd love to find out who it was who decided we were going to stop talking about training and start calling it learning ages ago, has given this kind of semantic problem of fitting people like Filtered into the learning industry, so to speak, because then people object that, well, this isn't learning. If you're talking about curation, you're providing people with chunks of information. Learning is more about transfer into long-term memory, and so you don't engage so much with instructional design as it were in that. And meanwhile, learning systems, some of them engage with instructional design in the way that they're designed, others don't. Others just kind of administrate the production of content. So where does Filtered fit in that sense, which I think is slightly different within the realm of learning? I'm sorry, it's a very complicated question, but you do complicated stuff.
You have to be true to our value proposition and answer a complicated question. I do agree on that massive semantic problem that we've been handed over, by the way, by the creation, by this idea of learning. It's so broad. I realized a couple of years ago that learning isn't even endemic to the human experience. It's endemic to reality itself. Whether you want to call it entropy or evolution, natural systems constantly learn and adapt. So the idea that there's some learning software that handles your learning is it's a bit of a quixotic endeavor. It's never really going to work. And no matter how hard you try to make super effective learning experiences, there's a whole world outside that learning experience that's going to transform how it is received. And we have seen this because we have got the high level data to show that format is very much dependent on context. Yes, there are amazing best practice learning experiences, but they're not always necessary. Sometimes content can be quite pedestrian because the person is highly motivated, and then you're looking for the motivation. On the other hand, often we're trying to attack really hard learning problems of really poor content, and then we wonder why that works. So there's nuance there. In terms of where we fit in, now putting aside the fact that Filtered has its own content offering, because we started off as an adaptive Excel training company, so we have a suite of Microsoft and soft skills courses ourselves that we can bring to bear. But putting that to one side, for this purpose, we're sitting above the level of kind of managing your individual items of learning content, or like an authoring environment, and more at the ecosystem level. So people turn to us when they need a flow of content that's going to be tagged in a particular way for a particular purpose, and they're at the level that the decisions about whether this library is included or that library is included, it's important to have data, to back those decisions. And for the individual, we're at the level of the individuals in large companies are faced with this kind of unpleasant reality where they have such a wide horizon of expectation and content around them. Speak to any high performer in a big company. Not only do they engage with what the company has on offer, but they have their own subscriptions to stuff like HBR if the company doesn't provide it. They have their own industry best practices that they follow. But then they're also assailed with almost constant, there used to be classroom, it's now virtual, but it's still the same beast, almost constant training requirements, hours and hours and hours spent every year on training that isn't personalized at all. That's a hard problem sort of space for the individuals in these big companies to be in. And there's different types, there's different personas, people who have nailed intentional learning and allocate time for it every week, people who don't do any intentional learning unless they absolutely have to because they're focused on achieving some commercial aim. And then the group of people in the middle who they'd like to establish a learning habit, but and I can be a bit unfair to them, I guess, because I'm talking about them in general, but they are disorganized learners. They don't really, the habit doesn't stick. You would want to bring to bear our kind of approach and solutions if you're interested in helping all of those different groups navigate this horizon of learning around them, trying to kind of bring it to bear. The outcome we're happy with is when someone, a spark takes off and someone starts to develop an adjacent skill that's going to help them in their job and help the company achieve what it wants to do. It doesn't matter if it's a Coursera course or an edX course or an internal piece of content or a mentoring relationship. None of that stuff is as important as the fact that it's got a good reason behind it. And I want to prove that by almost using the counterfactual, which is more common, which is people have no prioritization going into their decisions on how they take a course. Either they've been told they have to do it, and so they have no choice, and they once again do training on unconscious bias or leadership styles or something like that, or they just don't know how to make a good decision. So they just take an edX course, they're never going to apply to their job or to anything outside of work. And that happens a lot.
I'd like to come back to this question of skills, because the sort of work that you do is about ontologies in some part, I guess. So it would make sense that you offer a methodology for building skills frameworks, in the ontology of skills. I'll put something in show notes, people who don't necessarily know what an ontology is, which is most people, I thought. So skills is a pretty hot button area right now. And I'm beginning to pick up a bit of negative backwash about the whole skills project. Everybody is chasing off down this thing of, oh yeah, we need kind of skills matrices and so on. And what the old timers say is no one ever managed to make it work with competencies. No one ever managed to make competency frameworks really work. So why do we expect it to work any better with skills? That's how the argument goes. So how much devil is there in the detail with the skills framework, or does Filtered have some special sauce you can throw in the eyes of the evil one?
I think the answer I'm supposed to say is yes, we do have a special sauce. It's powered by AI. It definitely defeats the devil, and there's no way you can ever understand it, but it's very expensive. I think that's the answer I'm supposed to give here.
This is what we suspect you're going to come up with. Yeah.
Fortunately, it's not. It wouldn't be the truth, would it? So, firstly, competency frameworks weren't a failure. The devil really is in the detail here. The world around you is safe because of the almost universal adoption of task and role-led competency frameworks. It's the reason why the guy who comes to repair your boiler knows what he's doing. And it's also the reason why large, complex technical systems like continue to operate. So definitely there's a key place for all that work that was done in the early part of the 20th century, feeding into the certifications we have now. The challenge is trying to impose these sort of rigid frameworks on knowledge work. And that's where I think we have a real issue, and where a lot of the kind of bunkum and nonsense. So can lawyers develop their practice by following a given competency framework linked to CPD points? Can doctors really do that? Do doctors get better at being doctors from the activity that they pursue? Well, as we know, the research says no, they don't, but suggests these institutional learning systems based around competency frameworks are ineffective. So we've got an issue here, I think. You're not going to get away from needing a skill framework simply because you're not going to get away from the need for an ontology or a system of categorization at all. The biggest questions in mathematics, in physics, philosophy always come down to the categories. Most people think that day to day believe that the epistemic or knowledge of the world around you is primary, and the ontology, the categorization, is secondary. It's only when you get into the weeds of trying to explain things and change things that you realize that you have to start from the troubling assumption of making your ontology primary, like before the experience. And when you've got it right, because the stuff you start to do with that system of categories starts to make an impact on the world. That's how nuclear physicists know that their categories are right, because when they behave according to those rules, they seem to work. And it's the same for any kind of philosophy or practice. And so, yes, we do think that skill frameworks are really important. But the nuance we have is that, especially in this very difficult area of what skills do knowledge workers need and what should you focus on, we believe that there are nuanced answers, for big companies or for any companies and for any individual. There isn't a list of generic skills for the 21st century. A lot of the most vaunted skills are strongly imbued with mythologies that are unhelpful, myths around, the overall value of creativity, for example, I think are holding us back. The only way around it is to actually dig in. It's not to sell someone an off-the-shelf framework and say, hey, don't worry, guys, we've nailed it. Just follow this and you'll be out. It's to get into the weeds. And so the approach that I've seen applied inspiringly, really, to me at Filtered, is to say, chuck us the data you've got, chuck us all the roles in the company, all of the competency models that you have, give us your corporate strategy, we'll process the sector horizon reports for your industry. We'll tabulate all of that on the back of a much larger framework, and then use it to focus in on the specific skills. And then when there seems to be a lot of focus, that's when we might break out a category and expand it into its subcategories. On the other hand, we'll also seek to radically contract a lot of the stuff. So what you get is a much shorter list of much better defined areas, but short enough for the company to actually understand it. Because, of course, the problem with a framework that consists of hundreds of skills and hundreds of sub-levels within them is that no one will ever understand it or apply it.
Yeah. Do you find you have to push back against what some people in organizations might think is a skill? I mean, I saw something on LinkedIn that curiosity is a skill. I mean, is curiosity a skill? Some of the things that get called a skill seem to be a bit nebulous.
Yes, I think this is a problem of taking, especially in this area, so areas like curiosity and creativity, leadership, describing all of these things as skills that are generic, needs to be pushed back. But that doesn't mean there isn't value and usefulness in those concepts, and it doesn't mean they don't reflect something important. But it's important to get to the specifics of what you mean. If you're trying to drive a culture of curiosity, that does break down into specific behaviours that can be focused on. So that might mean that the more curious people will have a kind of ally culture within teams, so that it's valid to say, well, guys, I think this is a crazy idea and we should stop doing it. Or on the contrary, here's a crazy idea, let's do it. That's often what we mean by that. We're looking at specific behaviours in our culture that we want to change. So you need to define them, and you need to pursue them in a focused, intentional way. And I do think that the language of capability is maybe a bit better than the language of skill, because there's something about the idea of a skill which is a potential, right? Like I could have the skill of driving a car, but I might not own a car, so I might never exercise that skill. A capability might be the ability of a town to ferry everyone back and forward in a way that's good for the environment and economically efficient. We tend to start from those kind of capability programs and those kind of directives and directors who are brought in to specifically focus on capabilities. I suspect the skills agenda, just because it really resonates with the press, it resonates with the media, it resonates more and more with individuals, is certainly going to be the kind of persiflage on top of a deeper agenda around capabilities. Yeah. And so, fine, let's use the common language that people understand. But yes, obviously beware of
persiflage.
Yeah.
It'll be in show notes, folks. So don't worry, it's a herb that Jamie uses in his recipes. You're potentially in a very interesting place as a company Filtered, with so many hopes and expectations growing for AI and learning. What excites you about the future from a technology point of view, and what fears about the future might also come with that? I'm not talking about kind of general paranoia about AI taking all our jobs and stuff, but if you can see the opportunity in the future, what are the possible barriers that might come and ruin that?
We are in an interesting place. If I had to be honest, John, about what I think about the future and how excited I am, I would say that I'm far more concerned about the implications of the pandemic and the global lockdowns on interpersonal communication, in a general sense, of course, in a more important sense, the impact on children and young people and non-office workers, but even in the knowledge worker, in the world that we operate in kind of white-collar workers, I'm far more concerned about that. There's no doubt that the shift to remote working is going to make technologies like we have more important and exciting, but there are profound challenges that it raises as well. It's clearly not a healthy or useful environment for people who are early in their careers, who really need to be around other people in order to do their best work. So if you can call it excitement, I'm not sure excitement is the right word, but it's the potential. I had a recent conversation with a Danish researcher into narratives of digital transformation and industrial development and how that's all, and education and how that's all linked together. And we'll also include that in the show notes. And
yeah, please.
His idea was an idea he sparked in me rather, was this idea of negative technology. So he made the point that the achievement of the Industrial Revolution was not really creating these big smoky factories that were incredibly dangerous to work in. It was making cities that were livable using sewerage systems and education systems and the civil institutions that made it possible to live in that way. His name is Jesper Baslev, by the way. But Borslev, sorry, I'll share that in the show notes too.
Okay.
If you think about cars, the achievement of cars is not putting someone on top of an internal combustion engine and giving them the ability to speed around at any speed they like at will. It's the fact that, even though they are actually quite dangerous, the statistics show that cars are relatively safe to use, and that has gifted us a lot of fantastic technology. And so I think the excitement here, and it's captured quite well by the materials Microsoft released around Microsoft Viva and its employee experience platform. The exciting part is, in this world, which is so challenging for so many people, where human contact is likely to be hard and to return only slowly and tentatively, how can we use our technology to compensate for some of the damaging effects? How can we bring the kind of stability and prosperity off the back of, in my mind, a world that has is in a very worrying and dangerous phase? And obviously the debates are all over this, to do with social media and fake news and content overload. And I see Filter's mission as slotting right into that. It's a dangerous world out there. We're at the point in time similar to the early 20th century or early 19th century, where you have explosively powerful technologies that are easy to use and barely regulated. Making it a livable place for the generations to come will depend on, bringing that potential into some kind of more livable and controlled space, and I think that's the stuff that excites me, if you can call it that.
Good answer. Thank you very much, and thank you for many good, interesting, and thought-provoking answers, and for taking the time today.
No worries. It's been great to be on here. Thanks a lot, John.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to Toby and to our sponsors Learning Pool and NIIT. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. Please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube.
You can tweet me at John Helmer or reach me through my website, johnhelmerconsulting.com.
Coming up on the Learning Hack,
something completely new, a taster of our side hustle Great Minds on Learning. A deep dive into 2,000 years of learning theory with Donald Clark. This inaugural episode is all about the cognitivists. Ebbinghaus, Miller, Sweller, that lot. Don't miss it. Hit the subscribe button now.
Stay focused, learning people.
Now I finally get it.
Sorry, I've derailed what was actually a really fascinating answer, but I think in the interest of time, it's probably a good idea to move on.